Sometimes I think that my life has been divided into two parts, before and after Richard. It would be more accurate to say before and after his death. Richard was my husband for 47 years, and I still sometimes wake up at night, reach out and wonder why he isn't there. And then I remember. My name is Eleanor Harper. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived the last 3 of those years without Richard. We met in college when I was studying economics, and he was studying law. Those years were different. Women of my generation often left their studies for marriage, but Richard insisted I get my degree. "You have a sharp mind, Ellie," he said. "It would be a crime not to use it." And I did. After college, we both built careers. Richard became a successful corporate lawyer, and I became a financial analyst. We weren't rich, but we always lived comfortably in a suburb of Boston, in a house with a green lawn and a small garden where I grew roses. On weekends, we went to the theater or classical music concerts. It was a good, quiet life. Our daughter Sylvia was born when I was 32, a late child. Perhaps that was our mistake. We spent too long building careers and then spoiled her too much. An only child, she always got everything she wanted. Richard couldn't say no to her. I tried to be stricter, but somehow I found myself playing the role of evil mom while my father became kind and forgiving. Mornings in our house always started the same way. Richard would make coffee, I would make avocado toast, and we would eat breakfast together, discussing the news or plans for the day. This routine was unchanged for almost 5 decades. Even when Sylvia grew up and left to go to school and moved to Richmond, Richard and I continued our quiet breakfasts together. When Richard died, a heart attack, he didn't even get to say goodbye. Those breakfasts became unbearable. I sat at the table alone, stared at the empty chair across from me, and couldn't swallow a bite. For the first few months, I existed on autopilot. I woke up, drank coffee standing at the kitchen window, then went to my office where I continued to manage my investments. Richard had left me a good insurance policy, and I had always been good with money. We'd accumulated a decent amount of money over the years, and I kept building it up even after I retired. I was never really interested in money per se. It was just a tool, a way to keep me safe. Richard joked that I could have worked on Wall Street if it weren't for my pathological honesty. He was probably right. After he died, the house became too big, too empty. Every room held memories that now hurt. I started thinking about moving, but couldn't make up my mind. And then the fall happened. It happened in January, in the ice. I went out to get the mail, slipped on the porch steps, and fell. A fractured femoral neck, a typical injury for a woman my age. The surgery was successful, but the doctors insisted I needed care. I couldn't stay alone in a big house with stairs. Sylvia called from Richmond and offered to move in with her. "Until you recover, Mom," she said in a tone as if she were doing me a favor. Perhaps she was. Our relationship had never been particularly warm. Richard had been the link between us, and now he was gone. I agreed because the alternative was a nursing home. Plus, I wanted to get to know my daughter again. Maybe age had made her softer. Maybe now that she had a family herself, husband Nate and 2 teenage children, Bryce and Chloe, she'd learned to appreciate family ties. I was wrong. Sylvia and Nate's home in Richmond was modern, spacious, and cold. Sterile white walls, minimalist furniture, not a single extra thing. The complete opposite of our cozy Boston home, with antique furniture and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I'd been assigned a room on the first floor, Nate's former office, hastily converted into a bedroom. "So you won't have to take the stairs, Mom," Sylvia explained, but I could hear the irritation in her voice. Nate had lost his office, and he wasn't happy about it. Nate Baxter worked as a lawyer for a large firm. Tall, trim, with premature gray on his temples, he was always impeccably dressed and coldly polite. He spoke to me as if I were a client he was forced to interact with, professionally, but without the slightest warmth. "We're glad you're here, Eleanor," he said the first night, but his eyes said otherwise. I saw him look at my cane, at the medical bracelet on my wrist, and in his gaze I read, "I hope it won't be long." My room was functional but impersonal. A single bed, a bedside table, a dresser, and a small TV on the wall. No pictures, no bookshelves. My belongings, the few I'd brought with me, seemed out of place here. Richard's antique silver-framed photograph, my favorite books, the jewelry box he'd given me on anniversaries. It all looked foreign in the sterile environment of Sylvia's house. The first weeks were the hardest. I was slowly recovering from the surgery, learning to walk again. The physical therapist came 3 times a week, and those sessions were excruciating. But even harder were the looks on Nate's face when he came home from work and saw a stranger in his house. Sylvia worked as an editor at a publishing house and often stayed late. The kids, Bryce, 16, and Chloe, 14, were immersed in their own activities, school, friends, and gadgets. They barely noticed my presence. Gradually, I began to notice small signs that my family considered me a burden. Nate was always asking how much longer my rehab would last. Sylvia sighed when I asked for help with anything. Even my grandchildren, with whom I had hoped to build a relationship, seemed to avoid me. One day, I heard Nate on the phone in the next room. "No, we can't have the Petersons over this Saturday. My mother-in-law is still here, and it complicates things." I pretended not to hear when he entered the room, but my heart clenched. I had become a problem, an inconvenience, an extra person in my own daughter's house. Sylvia never said it outright, but I could see her wrinkle her nose when I turned the TV up too loud or took too long to use the bathroom. She was always in a hurry, always irritated, always had better things to do than talk to me. I tried to be helpful, offered to cook dinner, even though it wasn't easy with my cane. I tried to help the kids with their homework, but they preferred to look up information on the internet rather than listen to their grandmother. I even offered to pay for my own lodging, but Sylvia rejected the idea so harshly that I never brought it up again. Instead, I began to leave money discreetly, on the kitchen table, in a vase in the hallway, in Sylvia's coat pocket, small amounts that she might have thought were forgotten or accidentally left behind. It was my small way of contributing without hurting her pride. But money couldn't solve the main problem. I wasn't wanted in this house. This was becoming more and more obvious every day. 2 months after I arrived, the first major incident occurred. I accidentally broke a cup, an expensive designer piece, part of Sylvia's collection. My hand shook. The cup slipped out and broke into small shards. "It was handmade, Mom," Sylvia exclaimed, looking at the shards with an expression as if I had broken her heart. It was worth $200. I offered to pay, but she waved it away like an annoying fly. "It's not the money, it's the fact that the set is incomplete now. You can't buy it anymore." After that incident, I started noticing my things accidentally breaking or getting lost. My favorite brooch disappeared from my dresser. "You must have left it somewhere, Mom," Sylvia said. My e-reader stopped working after Bryce just looked it up to see how it worked. Richard's picture frame cracked when Chloe accidentally elbowed it. They were small things, but they hurt deeply. It seemed my presence, my belongings, my memories were all unwelcome in Sylvia and Nate's perfect home. One night, I heard them arguing in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. "How much longer, Sylvia?" Nate hissed. "It's been 2 months. The doctor said she needed 6 weeks to recover. It's already been 8. "What are you suggesting?" Sylvia replied, and I could hear the same irritation in her voice that he had. "Put her out on the street? She's my mother, Nate. I know, but we didn't plan for her to stay forever. We don't have terms. I need my office. The kids need space. It's too cramped for everyone. I'll talk to her, Sylvia sighed. Maybe we can find some kind of facility with good care, a nursing home. That's what they were discussing. A place where old people who don't need it are sent to be cared for by strangers for money. A place where I'd live out my days among people just as lonely and unwanted. That night I didn't sleep a wink. I lay staring at the ceiling and thought about how things had turned out. I remembered holding Sylvia in my arms when she was a baby, how I taught her to read, how I took her to ballet school, how I helped her with her homework. I remembered all the sacrifices Richard and I had made for her, giving up vacations, working overtime, saving money for her education. And this is how it ended. My daughter and her husband were discussing how to get rid of me. The next morning at breakfast, Sylvia was unusually attentive. She made my oatmeal herself, though I usually made it myself. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she asked with a strained smile. "Better," I replied. "I think I'll be able to do without my cane soon." "That's wonderful," she said, but there was no joy in her voice. Only relief. It meant the problem would soon be solved. That same day, another event happened that finally opened my eyes. Sylvia had visitors, her colleagues from the publishing house. They gathered in the living room, laughing, drinking wine, discussing books and authors. I heard their voices and decided to join in. I left my room, moving slowly with my cane, and headed toward the living room. But halfway there, I was intercepted by Sylvia. "Mom, did you want something?" she asked with the same strained smile. "I heard voices, thought I'd join you," I replied. "Oh, it's just a work meeting," she said quickly. "A very boring one, believe me. You're not going to like it. And it's late. You should be resting." It was only 8 in the evening. I wasn't tired. I was lonely. "All right," I said. "Good night, Sylvia." "Good night, Mom," she replied with relief, and I saw her furtively glance at her watch. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed. The laughter and conversations continued behind the wall, but there was no room for me there. I was an intruder in my own daughter's house, an inconvenience they wanted to get rid of. That night, I made a decision. I would not wait to be kicked out or sent to a nursing home. I have money, I have brains, and damn it, I have pride. Richard always said I'm stronger than I look. Now it was time to prove it. It was an unusually chilly April morning. Rain pounded on the windows, and the wind howled through the gutters. I woke earlier than usual and lay awake for a long time, listening to the house slowly coming to life. The sound of showers, muffled voices, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen. 2 weeks had passed since the night I'd overheard Sylvia and Nate talking, but nothing had changed. No one had ever had that promised conversation with me about moving into an institution. But the tension in the house had become almost palpable. I rose slowly, put on my robe, and headed for the bathroom. My room, Nate's former office, didn't have its own bathroom, so I had to use the guest room on the first floor. It was another minor inconvenience that seemed to annoy everyone in the house. When I came out of the bathroom, I ran into Nate in the hallway. He was already dressed in his perfectly ironed suit, with his briefcase in his hand. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said, with the same cold politeness he always did. "Good morning, Nate," I replied. He glanced at his watch, a demonstrative gesture that said more clearly than words, "You're making me late." "Is Sylvia in the kitchen?" I asked, ignoring his unspoken irritation. "Yes, getting the kids ready for school," he replied. Then, as if remembering his duties as master of the house, added, "There's coffee there, if you want it." "Thanks," I nodded, and he hurried toward the front door. I heard him shout, "See you tonight," to the rest of the family, but not to me, and slammed the door. In the kitchen, Sylvia was pouring cereal into bowls for Bryce and Chloe. Both teens sat staring at their phones. "Good morning," I said as I entered the kitchen. Sylvia turned around and something resembling annoyance flashed across her face, but she quickly hid it under a strained smile. "Morning, Mom. You're early today." I shrugged. "The rain woke me up." The teens muttered something that could pass for a greeting without taking their eyes off the screens. I poured myself a coffee and sat down at the table, trying to take up as little space as possible. Ridiculous when you think about it. I, a 72-year-old woman, huddled over my own breakfast so as not to disturb my family. "Mom, can you be alone tonight until tonight?" Sylvia asked, packing her bag. "I have a meeting with an author and then an editorial board. I'll be back late." "Of course, dear," I replied. "I'm quite self-sufficient, you know that." She nodded without looking at me. "It's just that you said you needed help with your new meds, and I thought, I'll figure it out," I said firmly. "Don't worry." Sylvia exhaled with relief. "Good. The kids are going to be late today, too. Bryce has practice, and Chloe has rehearsal." I looked at the grandchildren, who didn't seem to have heard a word of our conversation. "I see," I said. "Then I'll have the house all to myself." It was an attempt at a joke, but Sylvia tensed. "Mom, please don't touch anything in the living room. Nate's papers for an important case are in there, and he's very nervous about them." I felt the color rush to my cheeks. "I wasn't going to touch anything, Sylvia." "And also," she continued, ignoring my tone, "please don't turn on the oven. Remember what happened last time? Last time, I simply forgot to turn it off right after using it. No fire happened. There was no danger. But Sylvia and Nate had made a whole drama out of it." "Okay," I said briefly. Sylvia nodded as if checking off a mental list. "Let's go, kids. We're late." They all walked out, leaving me alone in the kitchen with unfinished coffee and the feeling that I was some dangerous element requiring supervision and restraints. After they left, I walked to my room and sat in a chair by the window. The rain was still pouring down, and the gray sky matched my mood perfectly. I pulled out my phone and opened the bank app. My savings were untouched. After Richard died, I'd sold our house and most of our belongings, leaving only the things dearest to my heart. The proceeds, along with our savings and insurance, amounted to an impressive sum. I could have bought a small apartment or rented something decent for the long term. But the thought of living alone in an unfamiliar place terrified me. Not because of physical infirmity. I was recovering well. It was the loneliness. After so many years of living with Richard, the silence of an empty apartment seemed unbearable. I closed the app and opened the photos on my phone. Pictures of Richard, of our house, of our travels. It all seemed so far away, like it was someone else's life. The days stretched on slowly. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. I turned on the TV, but turned it off after half an hour because all the programs seemed pointless. Sylvia's house didn't even have proper bookshelves, just decorative books in the living room, chosen for their color, not their content. Around noon, I decided to make dinner, not for myself, for the whole family. Thought it might be a nice gesture, a way to show that I wasn't just a burden, that I could be useful. I chose a simple recipe that didn't require the use of an oven, the chicken soup that Sylvia had always loved as a child. Slowly, carefully chopping the vegetables, I set the broth to simmer. The smell gradually filled the kitchen, taking me back to the time when my daughter would sit at the table and wait impatiently for me to place a steaming plate in front of her. Around 3 in the afternoon, when the soup was ready, I heard the sound of the front door opening. It was Sylvia, returning earlier than promised. "Mom," she called out, entering the house. "In the kitchen," I echoed, feeling a sudden excitement. Maybe the smell of soup would remind her of the good times. Sylvia entered the kitchen and froze when she saw me at the stove. "What are you doing?" she asked, and there was no warmth or gratitude in her voice, only surprise and something akin to annoyance. "Making soup," I replied, trying to keep a cheerful tone. Your favorite, with noodles and chicken. Remember how you loved it when you were a kid? Sylvia set her bag on the table and walked over to the stove. She peered into the pot, then looked around as if searching for signs of disaster. Mom, I told you not to touch the stove. I didn't turn on the oven, I replied, feeling the smile slide off my face. Just the burners. It's still dangerous, Sylvia said. You could have burned yourself or forgotten to turn it off. I'm not a child, Sylvia, I said, trying to control my voice. I've been cooking food my whole life. She sighed, like she was talking to a naughty teenager. I know you have, Mom, but you're not in your own home, and we're worried about you. You're worried about yourself, I thought, but said out loud. I just wanted to be helpful. Sylvia softened, but only slightly. I appreciate that, Mom, but please ask next time. Asking permission to cook a meal? In what world was that normal? Okay, I said briefly. Sylvia looked around the kitchen again. And you used a lot of dishes. Nate doesn't like clutter. I looked at the sink. There were only a few plates and a cutting board. I was going to wash, I said. I'll do it, Sylvia said in a tone like she was doing me a huge favor. And you need to rest. You've been standing a lot. It was humiliating, but I just nodded and walked out of the kitchen, leaving my daughter to clean up after my mess. Back in my room, I closed the door and leaned my back against it. My throat constricted with resentment. My daughter had treated me like a feeble old woman who couldn't even make soup without supervision. I felt like a waste, a burden, a hindrance in their perfect life. That evening, everyone gathered for dinner. Nate had returned from work, the kids from their classes. No one mentioned my soup, even though it was the one Sylvia had heated up and served. How was your day? Nate asked, addressing his wife and kids, but not me. Sylvia started talking about meeting the author, the kids about school. I sat in silence, trying to take up as little space as possible at my own desk. Then Nate pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and placed it on the table. We need to discuss expenses, he said, and from his tone, I knew it was going to be about me. The electric bill this month is 20% higher than usual, he said, looking at the numbers. And the water bill, too. I can make up for it, I said quickly. Nate looked at me as if he'd just noticed my presence. It's not about the money, Eleanor. It's about the fact that we need to be more prudent. I'm trying to save money, I said. I know, Mother, Sylvia interjected. But maybe we should shower less often. And not turn on the TV all day? I felt the color rush to my face. I showered every other day and only turned on the TV for a couple hours. Okay, I said, looking down at my plate. Also, Nate continued, medical expenses. Your meds are costing more than we expected. I pay for my own medications, I said firmly. Not for all of them, Sylvia objected. Some we get through Nate's insurance, and that raises our premiums. I didn't know what to say. I felt like a defendant in a court of law, deciding whether I was worthy of occupying space in their home. I could go completely on my insurance, I offered. Nate and Sylvia interjected. That would be helpful, Nate said. The rest of dinner passed in tense silence. After the meal, everyone went about their business, and I stayed behind to wash the dishes, the small contribution I could make. As I finished and was about to go back to my room, I heard voices coming from Nate's office, which was now located upstairs. It's unbearable, Sylvia, he was saying. She's everywhere. In the bathroom when I have to get ready for work. In the kitchen when I want to have a quiet dinner. She takes up too much space. I know, Sylvia replied in a tired voice. But what can I do? She's my mother. We've talked about it. There are wonderful homes for the elderly, where she'll be comfortable, where she'll be taken care of by professionals. They're expensive, Sylvia objected. She has money, Nate said. She sold the house, got insurance, and she's getting a pension. I can't just put her out, Sylvia said, but there was no confidence in her voice. No one's talking about putting her out. We'll offer options. We'll explain that it's what's best for everyone. I didn't listen further. Quietly walked to my room and closed the door. I sat on my bed and stared at the space in front of me for a long time. They wanted to get rid of me. My own daughter and her husband were discussing how to get me out of their home, out of their lives. I was an extra mouth to them, an extra care, an extra person. The next morning, I got up early and decided to make one more attempt at a relationship. Maybe if I was even more inconspicuous, even less demanding, they would let me stay. I made breakfast for everyone: toast, scrambled eggs, fruit. I set out the plates, poured the coffee. When the family came down for breakfast, they looked surprised. Mom, what is this? Sylvia asked. Breakfast, I replied with a smile. I thought I could help you get ready faster. Nate glanced at his watch. I don't have time for a full breakfast. I usually just have coffee. Oh, I said, feeling the smile freeze on my face. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. That's okay, he said, pouring himself some coffee into a thermos mug. Thanks for the effort. Sylvia sat down at the table, the children following suit. That's nice, Mom. Thank you. But you shouldn't have gone to so much trouble. It's no trouble for me, I said, sitting down next to them. Breakfast passed mostly in silence. The kids were tucked away on their phones. Sylvia was looking over some paperwork. Nate left almost immediately, tossing a quick "see you tonight" to the others. After breakfast, Sylvia took me aside. Mom, she said, lowering her voice even though the kids had already left to get ready for school. I appreciate your desire to help, but please, don't make such grandiose gestures. Grandiose? I interjected. I just made breakfast. And used up all the pans we have, Sylvia said. Now they'll have to be washed. I'll wash them, I said. It's not that, Sylvia sighed. It's just that. You're taking up too much space. Space, time. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I physically recoiled as if she'd pushed me. I understand, I said quietly. No offense, Sylvia said, noticing my reaction. It's just that we have our own rhythms, our own habits. And you're breaking them. I nodded, unable to speak. Nate and I want to talk to you tonight, Sylvia continued, about your future. Okay, I said, though everything inside clenched with fear and resentment. After the family left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring into space. Then mechanically, I washed the dishes, wiped the tables, put everything back where it belonged. I tried not to take up space, not to leave any trace of my presence. Back in my room, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I settled on the name Oliver Prescott. Oliver had been a friend of Richard and me for years, since college. He worked in real estate, was a successful realtor. We hadn't spoken since Richard's funeral, but I knew I could count on him. I pressed the call button, and after a few beeps, I heard his voice. Eleanor? He exclaimed with genuine surprise and joy. What a pleasant surprise. Hello, Oliver, I said, surprised at how good his voice sounded. How are you doing? All is well, he replied. But I have to ask about you. How are you? Where are you? I'm in Richmond, I said, at my daughter's. Oh, he said, and I could hear the understanding in his voice. Oliver knew about my complicated relationship with Sylvia. So, how is it? Not great, I admitted. There was a pause, and then Oliver said quietly, What can I do for you, Ellie? No one had called me Ellie since Richard's death. That nickname, that voice from the past, suddenly broke something inside me. I felt tears come up to my throat. I need your professional help, Oliver, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And your advice. I'm listening, he said. I took a deep breath and began to explain. I want to buy a property in Richmond, a specific building, an apartment building. For investment? Oliver asked. Not exactly, I said. More for strategic purposes. Oliver was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Does this house have anything to do with your daughter?" "Yes," I admitted. "She lives in it." Another pause. "Ellie," Oliver said cautiously, "what's going on?" And that's when I told him everything about how I was basically being forced out of the house, about the talking behind my back, about the plans to send me to a nursing home, about how I felt superfluous, unwanted, a burden. Oliver listened silently, not interrupting. When I finished, he sighed. "Ellie, I understand your pain, but are you sure you want to go this way? Buy a building to, what? Evict your own daughter?" "No," I said, even though that's exactly what I've been thinking about for the past few days. "I just want to control the situation, to have leverage. Do you understand?" "I understand," Oliver said, "but these are extreme measures. Maybe we should try other avenues. A frank conversation?" "There will be a conversation," I said, "tonight. They want to discuss my future, and I already know what they're going to say." Oliver was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay, if you're sure, I'll help. Which building exactly are you interested in?" I gave the address and described the building an apartment building in a downtown Richmond neighborhood, 12 apartments, built in the early 20 teens. "I know the complex," Oliver said. "Not a bad investment choice, actually. Real estate prices in that neighborhood are going up." "So you can help?" "I can. I'll contact local realtors, see who owns the building, see if there's any possibility of buying. But, Ellie, it'll take time. Weeks, maybe months." "I don't have months, Oliver," I said. "I probably don't even have weeks." "I understand," he said. "I'll do everything I can to speed up the process. But you have to be prepared for the fact that it might not work. The owner may not want to sell." "I have money," I said. "Money helps, but it's not omnipotent," Oliver pointed out. "And another thing, Ellie, think about the consequences. If you buy the building and evict your daughter, it could ruin your relationship forever." "Our relationship is already ruined," I said bitterly. "I'm just a burden to her, an extra mouth to feed." Oliver sighed. "I understand, but think about it anyway. In the meantime, I'll start working on your request." "Thank you, Oliver," I said with genuine gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Anything for old friends," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll call you back as soon as there's news." After talking to Oliver, I felt better. For the first time in a long time, I had a plan, a goal, a direction. I wasn't a helpless victim of circumstance. I was a woman with resources and connections, capable of changing my destiny. I spent the rest of the day thinking through the details of my plan and preparing for my evening conversation with Sylvia and Nate. I decided that I would be calm, rational, and not show my resentment or anger. I'd let them make their arguments, listen to their suggestions, and then I would see how things unfolded. One thing I knew for sure: I would no longer suffer humiliation in silence. I would no longer shrink away, trying to take up less space in this world. I deserve respect, and if my own daughter isn't capable of giving it, well, then I'll find my way without her. The evening of the serious talk came sooner than I expected. I spent the entire day in my room, preparing myself mentally for what was to come. I went through my things, mentally separating what I would take with me from what I might leave behind. It's strange how few truly necessary things a person has left by the time they're 72. Around 7 in the evening, Sylvia knocked on my door. "Mom?" She peeked into the room. "Dinner is ready. Nate's already home, and we'd like to talk." I nodded, closed the book I was pretending to read, and rose slowly. Coming. In the kitchen, Nate was already sitting at the head of the table, looking something up on his phone. The kids were absent. Apparently, they'd been sent to a friend's house on purpose so they wouldn't interfere with adult conversation. "Good evening, Eleanor," Nate said without taking his eyes off the screen. "Good evening," I replied, sitting down at the table. Sylvia was fussing at the stove, arranging the food on plates. I noticed that today she'd made my favorite casserole, the one I'd once given her the recipe for. It was an obvious tactical move to create a pleasant atmosphere before a difficult conversation. "This looks great," I said as Sylvia set the plate in front of me. "Your recipe," she replied with a strained smile. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, Nate set his fork aside, blotted his mouth with a napkin, and cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he began in a formal tone, as if he were opening a business meeting, "Sylvia and I wanted to talk to you about your situation." "My situation," I repeated, setting the cutlery aside. "Yes," Sylvia interjected. Dash dash Mom, we're really glad we were able to help you through a difficult time, but it's time to move on," Nate finished. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Sylvia nervously fixed her hair. "Nate and I were thinking, maybe you'd be more comfortable in a place where you'd be cared for by professionals." "In a nursing home," I said bluntly. Nate wrinkled his nose. "We prefer the term senior residence home." "It's not what you think it is, Eleanor. They're state-of-the-art complexes with lots of amenities, activities, medical staff. And most importantly, without you," I added quietly. Sylvia sighed. "Mom, don't get us started. We're thinking of your good." "About my good," I repeated, "not about me taking up too much space, as you put it yesterday." Nate threw a quick glance at Sylvia, and she blushed. "That's not what I meant," she said. "No?" I asked. "What did you mean when you told Nate I was an extra in your house, or when you discussed getting rid of me thinking I was asleep?" "Were you eavesdropping?" Nate asked, and his face darkened with anger. "No," I replied. "I just live in this house, though you seem to prefer that I be invisible and inaudible." Sylvia sighed irritably. "Mom, you're dramatizing everything. We just think you'd be better off among people your own age, with proper care." "I can take care of myself," I said. "No, you can't," Nate said in a sudden loud voice, slamming his palm on the table. The plates bounced, and I flinched. "You drop things. Forget to turn off appliances. Take over the bathroom for an hour when I should be getting ready for work." "Nate," Sylvia said warningly, but he didn't stop. "No, Sylvia, stop beating around the bush. The truth is, your mother doesn't belong here. Our house isn't designed for 5 people. We're cramped. I have to work in the bedroom because my office is occupied. The kids can't bring friends over because it's embarrassing. We can't have guests over because I'm in the way," I finished for him. "Yes," blurted out Nate. "Yes, you're in the way. You're here all the time with your old stuff, with your outdated habits, with your endless stories about the past. You're taking up physical and emotional space that we just don't have." There was dead silence in the room. Sylvia stared at her husband with wide-open eyes, and I stared at him with an icy calm I didn't really feel. "Nate?" Sylvia said at last. "You're overreacting." "No, Sylvia," he interrupted. "We've talked about this many times. Your mother has to move out. It's out of the question." "Don't talk to my daughter that way," I said quietly but firmly. Nate turned to me, and his face contorted with anger. "Don't tell me how to talk to my wife in my house, Eleanor. You're a guest here, and frankly, an unwelcome one." "Nate!" Sylvia exclaimed. "No, Sylvia, it's time to be honest," he was almost shouting. "I'm tired of pretending, tired of smiling and saying good morning every day when I come into the kitchen and see her there taking my place, tired of counting every penny spent on her medications and special food, tired of putting up with the smell of old age in my house. I sat there without moving, feeling every word sink into me like the point of a knife, but I didn't show any pain. Years of working in the financial world had taught me to save face, even in the most difficult situations. Nate, stop it now! Sylvia stood up, her face flushed with shame and anger. No, let her continue, I said calmly. Let him speak out to the end. Nate was breathing hard, his eyes glittering. You're an extra mouth in this house, Eleanor. An extra person. We're too crowded with you, and I want you gone. A long pause followed. I looked at Sylvia, expecting her to stand up for me, to say something in my defense, but she stood there, eyes downcast, biting her lip. Sylvia? I asked quietly. She looked up, and I saw in her eyes not anger at her husband, but weariness and agreement. Mom, she said quietly, Nate's right. We really are cramped, and you really would be better off in a specialized facility. I felt something inside me finally break. Not anger. I'd already gotten over that. Not resentment. That had become a constant backdrop to my life here. No, it was something deeper. The last thread that bound me to my daughter broke at that moment. I slowly stood up from the table. I see, I said in an even voice. Well, I won't bother you anymore. Mom, Sylvia began, but I held up my hand, stopping her. Don't, Sylvia. You've said everything with your silence. I headed toward my room, feeling their stares on me. Behind me, Nate was quickly saying something to Sylvia in a muffled voice, but I wasn't listening anymore. In my room, I methodically started packing. The few things that mattered to me, Richard's pictures, our wedding photo, the few books he'd given me, the jewelry box. I didn't take clothes, except for the essentials. Most of them were left in the house I'd sold in Boston anyway. Sylvia appeared in the doorway as I was buttoning my suitcase. Mom, she said uncertainly, you don't have to leave right now. It's late. It's raining outside. I'd rather be out in the rain than somewhere where they don't want me, I replied without turning around. Nate talked a little too much, Sylvia said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I turned to her. What about you? Were you overreacting too when you didn't say a word in my defense? When you agreed with him? Sylvia lowered her eyes. Mom, you don't understand. We have our own problems. Nate's working on an important case. He's under pressure. The kids are in transition. I'm having difficulties at work. And my husband died, I said quietly. I lost my home, my friends, my familiar life, and, as it turns out, a daughter. Sylvia flinched as if I'd slapped her. You're being unfair. Perhaps, I agreed, but I'm too old to pretend, and too tired to fight for a place where they don't want me. I picked up my suitcase and headed for the door. Sylvia stepped back uncertainly, letting me pass. Where will you go? She asked. Don't worry about that, I replied. I have money and a head on my shoulders. I'll manage. In the hallway, I put on my coat and grabbed an umbrella. The rain outside the window had intensified, and the drops drummed loudly on the roof. The forecast promised downpours all night. Nate stood at the stairs, arms crossed over his chest. His face expressed a mixture of guilt and relief. Eleanor, he began, I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. That's not true, I interrupted him. This is exactly what you wanted, and you got it. He didn't have anything to say. I looked at both of them, my daughter and her husband, standing in their perfect home where there was no room for me. Goodbye, I said, and opened the front door. A cold wind with rain hit my face. I opened my umbrella and walked out into the night without looking back. I don't remember how long I walked down the street before I figured out to call a cab through the app on my phone. It was raining like a bucket, My feet were soaking wet, and my coat felt heavy with moisture. But in a strange way, I felt relieved, as if a heavy weight had fallen from my shoulders. The cab took me to the Richmond Grand Hotel, the most expensive hotel in the city. If I was going to start a new life, why not do it in comfort? The receptionist looked surprised when an elderly woman, drenched to the skin with only a suitcase, asked for their best room. But my platinum credit card quickly dispelled his doubts. "Of course, Madam Harper," he said, instantly switching to a subservient tone. "How long do you plan to stay?" "I don't know yet," I replied. "Perhaps a week, perhaps longer." He nodded and handed me a key card. "Room 412, a suite overlooking the river. The concierge will show you in and help you with your luggage." A young man in uniform took my small suitcase and escorted me to the elevator. In the suite, he showed me the amenities, turned on the heat, and asked if I needed anything else. "A bottle of the most expensive champagne," I said, "and dinner for the room. Something light." When he left, I finally allowed myself to look around. The room was huge, with a separate living room, bedroom, and marble bathroom. The panoramic windows overlooked the James River, glistening in the night rain. I took a hot shower, changed into the bathrobe provided by the hotel, and felt reborn. When the champagne and dinner arrived, an exquisite lobster salad and bread still warm from the oven, I settled into a chair by the window and felt in control of my life for the first time in a long time. My phone rang several times, Sylvia trying to find out where I was. I didn't answer it. Instead, I dialed Oliver's number. "Ellie?" He answered instantly. "What's wrong?" "The plan is entering its active phase," I said, sipping my champagne. "I left my daughter." Oliver was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Are you okay? Where are you now?" "At the Richmond Grand," I replied. "And yes, I'm fine. Better than I've ever been." "That's a drastic move," he said cautiously. "What happened?" I briefly recounted the evening's events to him without going into emotional detail. "Oh, Ellie," Oliver sighed. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "You shouldn't be," I said. "It was cleansing. I know exactly where I stand now." "And where is that?" "On my own feet, Oliver." "As it was always meant to be." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have an update on the building. I've contacted the local agent. The building may indeed be for sale. The owner, an investment company out of New York, is considering restructuring his real estate portfolio." I straightened in my chair. And they might consider an offer if it's attractive enough." "How attractive?" I asked. Oliver named an amount that was impressive, but not prohibitive, within my means. "I can do it," I said after a pause. "Are you sure, Ellie?" "It's a lot of money." "Money is just a tool, Oliver. That's what Richard always said." "Yeah, but—" "No buts," I interrupted him. "I want to do this, and I can do it." Oliver sighed. "Okay, I'll set up a meeting, but it will take a few days, maybe a week." "I have time," I said, "and a comfortable place to wait." We discussed the details, and I ended the call with a sense of satisfaction. The plan was beginning to take shape. The next few days passed in a strange state of suspension. I stayed in a luxury hotel, ate at a restaurant overlooking the river, and booked a massage at the spa. Sylvia kept calling and texting, but I would reply with a one word, "I'm safe. Don't worry." Eventually, she stopped trying. On the third day, Oliver called me with the news. The meeting with the investment company representatives was scheduled for tomorrow. They were flying in from New York to discuss a potential deal. "That's unexpectedly fast," I remarked. "Your proposal has them interested," Oliver said, "especially the fact that you're willing to pay full price without bargaining." "I value my time more than money," I said. "Obviously," Oliver grinned. "You've always been a pragmatist, Ellie. We agreed to meet in the hotel conference room at 11 the next morning. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. My thoughts swirled around the upcoming meeting, around Sylvia and Nate, around what I was going to do. Was I right? Had I gone too far in my desire for revenge? But then I remembered Nate's face, contorted with anger, his words, "You're an extra mouth in this house," and Sylvia's silence, her unspoken but obvious agreement. And I knew I was doing exactly what I had to do. In the morning, I prepared carefully for the meeting. I put on a strict business suit I'd bought in the hotel boutique, styled my hair, and applied light makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not the helpless old woman that Sylvia and Nate thought I was, but a confident woman, ready for business negotiations. Oliver and two representatives of the investment firm, a middle-aged man and a middle-aged woman in impeccable suits, were already waiting in the conference room. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, let me introduce you to Mrs. Eleanor Harper," Oliver said as I walked in. "Pleased to meet you," I said as I shook their hands. "Likewise, Mrs. Harper," the man replied. "Mr. Prescott told us about your interest in our property. I must say we are intrigued." We sat down at the table and the waiter served coffee and water. "So," the woman began, opening a folder of documents, "you are interested in purchasing an apartment complex on Riverside Drive. May I ask about your intentions for this property?" I sipped my coffee and smiled. "Of course, I'm looking for a long-term investment, and perhaps a place for myself. Do you plan to keep the building as an apartment building, or are there plans to remodel?" the man asked. "At the moment, I plan to keep it as it is," I replied. "With minor improvements, of course." We discussed the details for about an hour, the price, the terms, the timing. I was prepared to pay the full amount at once, which clearly impressed the Harringtons. "You realize this is a non-standard procedure," the woman said. "Usually these kinds of transactions take months." "I realize that," I nodded. "But I also realize that for a business, time is money, and I'm willing to pay for speed." The man and woman glanced over. "We need to discuss this with our board of directors," the man said. "But frankly, your offer is very attractive." "When can I expect an answer?" I asked. "Give us 48 hours," said the woman. "We'll get back to you through Mr. Prescott." We exchanged handshakes and they left. Oliver remained seated next to me, looking on with surprise and admiration. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." He shook his head with a smile. "It's just, you're gorgeous, Ellie. A real business shark. Richard would be proud." I felt my cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you, Oliver." "For everything." "They'll take it," he said confidently. "Your offer is too good to refuse." "I hope so," I said, looking out the window at the city spread out below. Somewhere out there, in one of the apartments, lived my daughter, unaware that her life would soon change as drastically as mine had changed that rainy evening. The promised 48 hours had turned into 72. I spent those days in a strange suspended state, half in anxiety, half in anticipation. To distract myself, I ordered a laptop into my room and immersed myself in researching the Richmond real estate market, tax rules for apartment building owners, and the legal aspects of evicting tenants. It was like returning to my old job, and I found that my brain, contrary to Sylvia and Nate's ideas about senile dementia, was functioning as acutely as ever. On the third day, just as I was starting to get nervous, the phone rang. "Ellie?" Oliver's voice sounded excited. "They're in agreement." I exhaled, not realizing I was holding my breath. "On all the terms?" "On all of them," he confirmed. "Quick transaction, full value, minimal paperwork. They even agreed to keep the deal confidential, like you asked." "Great," I said, feeling satisfaction spill inside. "When can we start the process?" "Already started. Their lawyers are preparing the paperwork. We can meet with them tomorrow morning at 10. I smiled to myself. I'll be ready. After the call, I went to the window and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, in one of the many apartments, Sylvia and Nate were living, unaware of what was happening. In the 10 days since the night I'd left their house, Sylvia had only called me 3 times. The first time was the next day, voice guilty but without real remorse. Mom, where are you? We're worried. The second 3 days later, already with a note of irritation. Mom, it's immature to just disappear without telling anyone where you are. And the third, a week later, formal and cold. Mom, please let me know you're okay. We need to discuss your things. To all the messages, I responded with the same short reply. I'm safe. Don't worry, nothing more. I wondered if they were really worried or just performing a social ritual, doing what one is supposed to do when an elderly relative suddenly leaves home. Were there searches, calls to hospitals, appeals to the police? I had my doubts. In the evening, I ordered dinner for the room and turned on the TV to unwind a little. The local news was covering a charity event in town, and suddenly I saw familiar faces. Nate and Sylvia, elegantly dressed, with glasses of champagne, laughing surrounded by equally well-dressed people. I froze with fork in hand. It had only been 10 days since I left their home, and they were already at a social event, happy and carefree, not a trace of anxiety or worry on their faces. The host introduced Nate as a renowned lawyer and philanthropist, and Sylvia as a talented editor and active member of Richmond's cultural community. They smiled for the camera, the perfect couple, successful professionals supporting arts and culture. I turned off the TV, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Not anger, not resentment. I'd already experienced those feelings. More like a tired realization that I had never been an important part of their lives. Perhaps I had never been an important part of Sylvia's life, even when she was a child. In the morning, I prepared thoroughly for the meeting. I wore the same business suit as last time, but added a pearl necklace that Richard had once given me. I put my hair in a tight bun and applied light makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a confident, elegant woman, ready for an important business deal. Waiting in the hotel conference room were Oliver, the Harrington couple, and an unfamiliar man whom Oliver introduced as Edward Donovan, a representative of the law firm handling the deal. Mrs. Harper, Mrs. Harrington said hello to me. It's good to see you again. Likewise, I replied, taking a seat at the table. We spent the next 2 hours going over the paperwork. Mr. Donovan explained every clause, every detail, every obligation. I listened attentively, asked questions, sometimes suggested changes. My financial experience was invaluable. I could easily navigate legal terms, understand the tax implications, and see the potential risks. The Harrington couple exchanged surprised glances several times, clearly not expecting such business acumen from an older woman. You're obviously not new to real estate, Mrs. Harper, Mr. Harrington remarked when I suggested I change the wording of one of the clauses to reduce the tax burden. I had a good teacher, I replied with a slight smile, my husband, and 40 years of experience in financial analysis. By noon, we had agreed on all the details. All that remained was to sign the paperwork and make the money transfer. When will you be ready to finalize the deal? Mrs. Harrington asked. I looked at Oliver and he nodded. Today, I said firmly. Unless there are any objections, I'd like to finalize everything today. The Harrington couple looked at each other again. This is unusually fast, Mr. Harrington said. Usually the process takes weeks, sometimes months. I understand, I nodded, but all the paperwork is in place. The financial terms have been agreed upon. What's stopping us from closing the deal today? Technically nothing, Mr. Donovan admitted. If the funds are transferred today, we can close the deal. Great, I said. I'm ready to make the transfer right now. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app, and, after a few manipulations, showed the screen to Mr. Harrington. On it was a confirmation of a transfer of the full amount to their company account. Everyone present looked impressed. Such determination and speed were unusual even for experienced businessmen. "Well," said Mr. Harrington after a pause, "it seems we have no reason to delay. If the bank confirms receipt of the funds, we can sign the papers this afternoon." "That's fine," I said. "I'll look forward to your call." After they left, Oliver and I stayed in the conference room. "Ellie," he said, shaking his head with wonder, "you never cease to amaze me." "What do you mean?" I asked, gathering my papers. "In the way you handle things. Decisive, quick, no hesitation. Most people would spend weeks weighing the pros and cons, consulting every possible expert. And you?" "And I'm too old for procrastination," I finished for him. "I don't have time for long deliberations." Oliver looked at me carefully. "It's not about age, and you know it. You've always been like this. Richard has often said that you make better decisions in 5 minutes than most people do in 5 weeks." I smiled, remembering my husband. He was exaggerating. "I don't think so," Oliver said, "especially looking at what's happening now." We left the conference room and headed for the elevators. "What about Sylvia and Nate?" Oliver asked as we waited for the elevator. "What about them?" I interjected. "Do they know what you're going to do?" "No," I answered shortly, "and they won't know until it's all finalized." Oliver was quiet for a moment, then asked cautiously, "Are you sure you want to go all the way? Evict your own daughter?" I looked at him for a long moment. "They evicted me, Oliver. On a rainy night with no regrets, no thought. I was an extra mouth to them. Now let them feel what it's like to be on the street." The elevator arrived and we stepped inside. "But they're your family, Ellie," Oliver said quietly. "No," I shook my head. "My family died with Richard. What's left are the people who carry his last name, but not his values." Oliver didn't argue. We reached my floor in silence. "I'll call you when I hear from the Harringtons," he said as I stepped off the elevator. "Thank you, Oliver," I said, "for everything." Back in the room, I felt strangely tired, not physical, emotional. It was as if all the energy, all the feelings, all the thoughts that had been bubbling inside me for the past few days had suddenly evaporated, leaving only emptiness. I went to the window and looked out at the city, flooded by the midday sun. Somewhere out there, Sylvia was probably sitting in her office at the publishing house, editing someone's manuscript. Nate was at his law firm, preparing for another case. They were living their lives, not even thinking about me, about where I was, or what was wrong with me. And here I stood, in a luxury hotel, preparing to turn their world upside down. Was I right? It was a question that had haunted me from the moment I decided to buy the building. Had I gone too far in my desire for revenge? Had I become as cold and heartless as they were? But then I remembered Nate's words, "You're an extra mouth in this house," and Sylvia's silence, her unspoken but obvious agreement, and the resolve was returning. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice being done. This was a lesson they had to learn, a lesson about not throwing people out of your life like unwanted junk, especially those who gave you that very life. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. It was Oliver. "The bank has confirmed the transfer," he said without preamble. "The Harringtons are ready to sign the papers at 4 o'clock today. Are you ready?" "Yes," I replied, "more than ready." At 3:30, I went down to the conference room. Oliver was already there, inspecting the documents that lay in neat stacks on the table. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Everything's perfect," he nodded. I checked every line. No pitfalls, no hidden conditions. I sat down next to him and picked up one of the documents. "So, after today, I'll own the building." "Yes," Oliver confirmed. a full-fledged owner with all rights and responsibilities, including the right to evict tenants? Oliver looked at me carefully. Yes, but with legal procedures. You can't just put them out on the street. There are notices, deadlines, legal formalities. I understand, I nodded, and I'm not going to break the law. But I want to know my rights. Your rights are extensive, Oliver said. As the owner, you can refuse to renew the lease. You can raise the rent within reasonable limits. You can initiate an eviction if you violate the terms of the agreement. And if I decide to tear down the building and build something else in its place? Oliver raised his eyebrows. That's a drastic step. But yes, with the right permits and following all the regulations, you can do it. But the tenants should still be given time to find a new place to live. I don't plan on tearing down the building, I reassured him. I just want to know all my options. At that moment, the door opened and the Harrington couple entered, accompanied by Mr. Donovan and another man, a notary public. I understood from the introduction. Mrs. Harper, Mr. Harrington said, hello. I'm happy to report that everything is ready to finalize the transaction. We exchanged handshakes and everyone sat down at the table. The next hour passed in signing documents, checking details, discussing the last formalities. I signed sheet after sheet, reading each item carefully, even though Oliver had already checked everything. Finally, Mr. Donovan gathered up all the signed documents and nodded. Congratulations, Mrs. Harper, he said formally. You are now the owner of the apartment complex on Riverside Drive. Mrs. Harrington handed me an envelope. Here are all the keys, access codes, management company contacts, and current tenants. I took the envelope, feeling its weight, not physical, but symbolic. In my hands was not just property, but the fate of 12 families, including my daughter's family. Thank you, I said. I appreciate your promptness and professionalism. We exchanged a few more formalities, and the Harrington couple and their lawyer left. Oliver, the notary, and I stayed behind to complete the last formalities. When everything was finished and the notary left as well, Oliver looked at me with a slight smile. Well, Ellie, he said, congratulations on your acquisition. Thank you, I replied, opening the envelope and examining the contents. It wouldn't have gotten done without you. I only helped with the contacts. He brushed it off. Everything else is your doing. I found a list of tenants with contact information in the envelope. I ran my eyes over the names until I found what I was looking for. Apartment 8, Nate and Sylvia Baxter. They're here, I said quietly. Oliver looked over my shoulder. Yeah. Now what? Now, I said, closing the envelope. The next phase begins. We left the conference room and headed for the elevators. Are you planning on letting them know today? Oliver asked as we waited for the elevator. No, I shook my head. I want to tour my new property first, get to know the property manager, get a feel for how everything works. Oliver nodded. A reasonable approach. When the elevator arrived, I turned to Oliver. Will you ride with me tomorrow? To see the building? Sure, he said. What time? 10 o'clock? I'll be in the hotel lobby. We shook hands, and I stepped into the elevator. When the doors closed, I let myself exhale. It had been a long and emotionally intense day, but it had been a success. I had accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. Back in the room, I ordered dinner and a bottle of champagne. It was a day to celebrate, despite the mixed feelings I was experiencing. When the champagne arrived, I poured myself a glass and walked over to the window. The sun was setting, coloring the city in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere out there, in one of the apartments in the building I'd just bought, Sylvia and Nate were probably preparing for dinner, unaware that their lives were about to change. I raised my glass in a silent toast. Here's to you, Richard, I whispered. You've always said I'm stronger than I appear. I hope you'd approve of what I'm doing. I knew he probably wouldn't have approved. Richard had always been kinder than me, always willing to forgive, but he had never faced what I had faced, never felt unwanted, superfluous, a burden to his own child. I took a sip of champagne and felt the bubbles tickle my throat, bitter and sweet at the same time, just like my victory. Tomorrow, a new phase of my plan would begin. Tomorrow, I'll see my new property, meet the people who now work for me, and I'll start preparing for the final act of this drama, meeting my daughter and son-in-law. I didn't know how I would feel when I saw their faces when they learned that their new landlord was the extra mouth, the old woman they'd put outside on a rainy night. Will there be satisfaction, a triumph, or maybe sadness at the realization of how far apart we were? I didn't know, but I was ready to face those feelings, whatever they were. I'd come too far to back down now. The morning was clear and cool. I woke up earlier than usual, feeling strangely excited, like a child on his birthday. Today would be the first time I would see my new property not as an abstract line in the deeds, but as an actual building, the place where 12 families, including my daughter, lived. After breakfast, I went down to the hotel lobby. Oliver was already waiting for me, elegant in his dark blue suit, leather briefcase in hand. "Good morning, Ellie." He said hello with a smile. "Morning," I replied, adjusting my scarf. The day was sunny but windy, so I decided to dress warmer. We got into a cab, and Oliver gave the driver the address. On the way, he told me about the building I'd bought, built in the early 2000s, 12 apartments, 4 on each of 3 floors, a small courtyard, underground parking. All the apartments were rented. The tenants were mostly middle-class professionals, young families, a few elderly couples. When we pulled up to the building, I was pleasantly surprised. It was a modern red brick complex with large windows and balconies. There was a well-maintained area with small trees and shrubs all around. The building looked solid and neat, a good investment even without my personal interest. We were greeted at the entrance by a middle-aged man in a strict suit. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked, extending his hand. "Robert Caulfield, the complex manager. Mr. Prescott called me yesterday." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Caulfield," I replied, shaking his hand. "It's an honor to work with the new owner," he said in a professional tone. "I've prepared all the necessary paperwork and am ready to show you the building." We stepped inside. The lobby was spacious and bright, with marble floors and a concierge desk. The young woman behind the counter said hello, and Mr. Caulfield introduced her as Sarah, the daytime concierge. "We have 3 concierges working in shifts," he explained. "24-hour service is one of the perks of our complex." He took us on a tour of the building. We saw the boiler room, utility rooms, and the underground parking lot. Everything was in excellent condition, clean and well-maintained. Mr. Caulfield then showed us an empty apartment that had recently been vacated by a tenant who had moved out and was being prepared for new tenants. It was a spacious one-bedroom apartment with a modern kitchen, large living room, and a balcony overlooking the courtyard. It was bright, with high ceilings and large windows, a really nice place to live. "Are all the apartments in the building of a similar layout?" I asked, looking around the premises. "For the most part, yes," Mr. Caulfield nodded. "There are some differences in size and layout, but the general concept is the same for all of them." "And apartment number 8? I asked, as if by the way. "One of the best," Mr. Caulfield replied. "It's a corner one, on the 2nd floor, bigger than the standard one, with an extra bedroom and a better kitchen layout." I nodded, memorizing that information. My daughter's apartment. After touring the building, we returned to the manager's office, a small but functional space on the 1st floor. Mr. Caulfield offered us coffee and spread the file folders on the desk. "Here is all the information about the current state of the building, contracts with service providers, leases with tenants, and financial statements," he said. "As you can see, the complex is generating a steady income. I looked through the documents, paying particular attention to the lease with the Baxters. They had lived here for 5 years, paid rent on time, and had no arrears. All in all, perfect tenants, if it weren't for the fact that they'd put me out on the street. Mr. Caulfield, I said, setting aside the folders, I have plans for this building. Of course you do, Mrs. Harper. He nodded. New owners often want to make changes. I'm planning a remodel, I said firmly. A massive one. I may have to temporarily evict all the tenants. Mr. Caulfield looked surprised. That's a dot. A serious decision, Mrs. Harper. May I ask what kind of remodeling you're planning? A complete overhaul of all systems, I replied. Electrics, plumbing, heating, possibly remodeling some of the apartments. I haven't decided all the details yet, but the work will be extensive and lengthy. Mr. Caulfield was clearly concerned. It will cause considerable inconvenience to the tenants. That's why, I interrupted him, I'm prepared to offer them compensation. Enough to enable them to find other accommodation without financial loss. Mr. Caulfield blinked. That is very generous of you. I appreciate good tenants, I said, and I want the transition to go as smoothly as possible. For everyone. For everyone? He interjected, noticing the special emphasis on that word. I smiled. For almost everyone. There's one family I have a special beef with. Apartment 8. The Baxters, Mr. Caulfield frowned. Have we had problems with these tenants? You haven't, I said. I have. Oliver, who had been silent all this time, cleared his throat. Ellie, maybe we should explain the situation. I nodded and turned to Mr. Caulfield. Sylvia Baxter is my daughter. Mr. Caulfield looked completely confused. That is, unexpected. Yes, it will be a surprise to her too, I said dryly, especially considering the fact that she and her husband kicked me out of their house 2 weeks ago. And I told him the short version of the story, how I'd been living with my daughter after breaking my hip, how they'd considered me a burden, how Nate had called me an extra mouth, how I'd been forced to leave on a rainy night. Mr. Caulfield listened with increasing surprise and sympathy. It's awful, Mrs. Harper, he said when I had finished. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially from one's own family. Exactly, I nodded. That's why I want you to prepare a special notice for apartment 8. They must vacate the premises within 30 days, as required by law, without compensation. On what grounds? Mr. Caulfield asked practically. Breach of occupancy, I said. Mr. Caulfield looked uncertain. But if they haven't violated the conditions, they will, I said firmly. There's going to be a noisy party in their apartment tonight that will last late into the night. The neighbors will complain. It won't be the first time, as you'll discover in the complaint log. Mr. Caulfield looked at me with obvious disapproval. Mrs. Harper, I can't falsify. No one is talking about falsifying, Oliver interrupted him gently. We just want you to keep a closer eye on this particular apartment, and if there are irregularities, document them properly. Mr. Caulfield hesitated. I could see in his eyes the conflict between professional duty and human sympathy for my story. Look at this, I said, opening the Baxter's lease. Paragraph 7.3 states that the tenant agrees not to create conditions that disturb the comfort and tranquility of the neighbors. And Clause 9.2 states that systematic violation of the rules of residence is grounds for unilateral termination of the contract. Isn't that so? It is, Mr. Caulfield reluctantly admitted, but that would require documented instances of violations, which there will be, I said confidently. Just be careful. Mr. Caulfield sighed. All right, Mrs. Harper. I'll keep an eye on the situation. Good, I nodded. Now let's discuss the notices for the other tenants. I want them sent out today. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the upcoming remodeling and compensation for the tenants. I was generous, offering sums to cover not only the cost of moving, but also the difference in 6 months' rent if the tenants had to rent more expensive housing. Everyone except the Baxters received these terms. When all the details were agreed, Mr. Caulfield said, "Notices will be delivered this evening, personally into the hands of each tenant." "Excellent," I nodded, "and I want a report on the tenants' reactions, especially apartment 8. "Of course, Mrs. Harper." We finished the meeting, and Mr. Caulfield escorted us to the exit. As we exited the building and got into a cab, Oliver finally spoke up. "Ellie, are you sure this is the right way?" "The right way?" I interjected. "I don't know, but it's my way." "Are you going to actually remodel the building?" he asked. I looked out the window at the city whizzing by. "Maybe, at some point, but first I want to teach you a lesson." Oliver sighed. "I'm worried about you, Ellie. Revenge rarely brings the satisfaction one expects from it." "It's not just revenge," I said quietly. "It's justice." We reached the hotel in silence. Saying goodbye in the lobby, Oliver said, "Call me if you need help, or just to talk." I nodded, feeling suddenly grateful for this old friend who didn't judge me, even when he didn't agree with my actions. Back in the room, I felt a strange restlessness. The plan had been set in motion, the wheel had started turning, and now all that was left to do was wait. I imagined Sylvia and Nate coming home tonight, finding the notice, reading it with growing shock and panic. How would they feel? The same way I felt when they put me out on the street? Or will it be just an inconvenience to them, another problem to be solved? I ordered room service dinner and turned on the TV to distract myself. Nothing interesting was on, and my thoughts kept returning to Sylvia and Nate, to their imminent shock, to their panic. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mr. Caulfield. "Mrs. Harper," he said in a strained voice, "notices have been delivered to all the tenants." "E?" I asked, feeling my heart begin to beat more frequently. "Reactions vary," he said. "Most, of course, are upset about having to move, but the compensation has softened the blow. Some have even thanked me for my generosity." "An apartment 8?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Mr. Caulfield was silent for a moment, then said, "They didn't take the news well." "Tell me more about it," I asked. "Mr. Baxter became aggressive," Mr. Caulfield said reluctantly, yelling, threatening legal action. Mrs. Baxter was more subdued, but obviously shaken. "They're demanding a meeting with the new owner." I smiled. "And what did you tell them?" "That I would pass on their request," Mr. Caulfield replied, "but I can't guarantee that the owner will agree to a meeting." "Good," I said. "Anything else?" "Yes," Mr. Caulfield said after a pause. "They started calling the other tenants, finding out about their notices. Found out that they were the only ones denied compensation and given a minimum time frame for eviction. That intensified their anger." "I can imagine," I said dryly. "Anything else?" "Mr. Baxter is in the lobby right now," Mr. Caulfield said with obvious discomfort, "demanding the new owner's contact information. He's quite persistent." I pictured Nate, usually so reserved and cold, now yelling at the concierge in the lobby. The picture gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected. "Don't give him any information," I said. "Tell him that all communications must go through the management company, that is, through you." "Yes, Mrs. Harper," said Mr. Caulfield, "but he won't quiet down. He's threatening to call the police." "On what grounds?" I asked with a chuckle. "He's talking about fraud, discrimination, violation of his rights." "It all makes no sense, and as a lawyer he should realize that," I said. "But if he continues to make trouble, you can call security and document it as a trespassing offense." Mr. Caulfield sighed. "Okay, Mrs. Harper." "Keep me informed," I said. And remember, no personal information about the new owner. After the call, I went to the window and looked out at the city at night. Somewhere out there, in the building that was now mine, Nate was raging in the lobby, and Sylvia was probably frantically calling friends and acquaintances, trying to find some lead, some information about the new owner. I imagined their panic, their confusion, their anger. And strangely, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Instead, there was an emptiness, as if I were watching someone else's drama that evoked no emotion in me. Maybe Oliver was right. Maybe revenge wasn't bringing the satisfaction I'd expected. The phone rang again. This time it was Sylvia. I stared at the screen for a long moment, wondering if I should answer it. Finally, I made up my mind and took the call. Yes, I said calmly. Mom? Sylvia's voice sounded strange, high and strained, like she was on the verge of tears. Mom, we're in trouble. What kind of trouble? I asked, trying to sound neutral. We're being evicted, she said, and tears actually broke through in her voice. Some new owner bought the building, and we've been given 30 days to evict. No compensation, unlike all the other tenants. This is some kind of mistake, some kind of misunderstanding. What makes you think it's a mistake? I asked. Because we are good tenants, Sylvia exclaimed. We always pay on time, never make trouble. And on what grounds are you being evicted? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Some made-up residence violations, said Sylvia bitterly. That's a lie. We've never broken any rules. That's unpleasant, I said demurely. Unpleasant? Sylvia exclaimed. Mother, it's a disaster. We can't find another apartment in 30 days, especially without compensation. This is crazy. Nate's trying to find out who the new owner is now, but no one's saying anything. And you called me because? I asked, finishing her sentence. Sylvia hesitated. Yeah, I thought maybe you could help with temporary housing. I almost laughed. 2 weeks ago, they'd put me out on the street, and now they were asking for help with housing. You want to move in with me? I asked with feigned surprise. No, not really, Sylvia said quickly. But maybe you could help financially? We're not asking for much, just a little help with the deposit on the new apartment. And where do you think I live, Sylvia? I asked coldly. There was a pause. Yeah, I don't know, Mother. You didn't say. Exactly. I didn't say. And you didn't ask. You called me 3 times in 2 weeks, and not once did you ask me where I lived, how I lived, if I needed help. Mom, that's not fair, Sylvia began. We were shocked when you left. We looked for you, called hospitals. That's not true, I interrupted her. You weren't looking. You were just glad the problem had solved itself. Mom? No, Sylvia, I said firmly. I can't help you with a place to live. I'm in a difficult situation myself, but maybe this will be a good lesson for you and Nate. A lesson? She interjected. What kind of lesson? About what it's like to be without a home, I said. About what it's like to be an extra. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in Sylvia's head as she tried to figure out the hidden meaning of my words. Mom, she finally said slowly, do you know something about this? About the new owner? What makes you think that? I asked innocently. Because, because it's too weird a coincidence. We, we had a fight. You left, and 2 weeks later, we're evicted without compensation, unlike all the other tenants. A strange coincidence indeed, I agreed. Mom? Sylvia's voice trembled. Did you, did you have anything to do with this? I remained silent, savoring the moment when understanding began to creep into her mind. Oh my God, she whispered. It's you. You bought the building. What a ridiculous idea, I said quietly. No, it's true, Sylvia said with growing confidence. Only you could have done it. Only you have both the motive and the means. Sylvia, I interrupted her, if you're having trouble finding a place to live, I suggest you contact a real estate agency. I'm sure they can help you find a new apartment within your budget. Mom, please. There was desperation in her voice now. If this is you, if you bought the building, please don't do this. Don't evict us. We can talk. We can fix this. Fix everything? I interjected bitterly. What about that night, Sylvia? When your husband called me an extra mouth and you didn't say a word in my defense. How do you fix that? Sylvia was silent. I could almost see her standing in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, face pale with shock and realization. Mom, she finally said quietly, what do you want? What do I want? I interjected. I want you to understand what it's like to be thrown away like an unwanted thing. What it's like to be on the street, not knowing where to go. What it's like to be an extra in the lives of the people you love. Mom, please. Good night, Sylvia, I said, and hung up. The phone rang again almost immediately, but I didn't answer it. It rang and rang, but I just stared at the screen where my daughter's name popped up. Then a message came through. Mom, please let's talk. We can make things right. We're sorry. I didn't respond. Another message. Mom, think of the kids. They will have to change schools mid-year. Please don't do this to them. I deleted the message. The phone rang again, but now it wasn't Sylvia's number, but an unfamiliar one. I suspected it was Nate, calling from his work phone. I didn't answer it. Another message, now from Nate. Eleanor, we need to talk. What you're doing is illegal. We can sue. I smiled. Bluff. Nate was a lawyer and knew the new owner had every right to refuse to renew the lease or terminate it if the terms were violated. My phone kept ringing and vibrating with messages, but I wasn't paying attention to it anymore. I muted it and put it on the bedside table. Then I went to the window and took a long look at the city at night. Somewhere out there, in the building that now belonged to me, my daughter and her husband were experiencing the worst night of their lives. They were panicked, desperate, not knowing what to do or where to go, just as I had been 2 weeks earlier. But in a strange way, I didn't feel the fulfillment I expected. Instead, there was an emptiness, as if I had accomplished a necessary task, but had gotten no joy from it. Maybe revenge really doesn't bring the satisfaction I expected. Or maybe the real satisfaction is yet to come when I see their faces, when they know the truth, when they fully realize what they've done and what they've received in return. I awoke at dawn after a restless night. The phone I turned on in the morning showed 27 missed calls and 32 unread messages, most from Sylvia and Nate, a few from unknown numbers, probably their friends or co-workers. I didn't bother reading the messages or listening to the voicemails, just deleted them all and set the phone aside. Today was the day I'd been leading up to all this time, the day of the final paycheck. I decided it was time to confront Sylvia and Nate face to face, to reveal the truth to them and see their reactions with my own eyes. I called Oliver, and he agreed to accompany me. For moral support, he said, and as a witness, just in case your son-in-law decides to act rashly. After breakfast, I carefully prepared for the meeting. I put on a navy blue suit that always made me feel confident, put on light makeup, and styled my hair. The mirror reflected a woman who knew her worth and wasn't going to bend to other people's expectations. Oliver was waiting for me in the hotel lobby, punctual and elegant as always in his gray suit. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked as we got into the cab. Absolutely, I replied, looking straight ahead of me. We drove in silence. The city outside the window looked ordinary. People going about their business, unaware of the dramas playing out behind closed doors. When the cab stopped in front of the building, I took a deep breath, gathering my composure. We entered the lobby, and the concierge, Not Sarah, but a young man I hadn't seen before, greeted us. "Good morning," I said. "Please let Mr. Caulfield know that Mrs. Harper is here." "Certainly, ma'am." He picked up the telephone receiver. A few minutes later, Mr. Caulfield appeared, looking tense and sleep-deprived. "Mrs. Harper," he said hello. "It's good to see you." "Good morning, Mr. Caulfield," I replied. "Anything new?" He cast a quick glance at the concierge and suggested, "Why don't we go into my office?" I nodded, and we followed him across the hall to a door with a sign that read, "Manager." As the door closed behind us, Mr. Caulfield exhaled. The night was stormy. Mr. Baxter made quite a scene in the lobby. Had to call security. "Documented?" I asked. "Yes, it's all documented in the incident log and on the security cameras." "Good," I nodded. "What about the other tenants?" "Most have accepted the situation. The compensation helps soften the blow. Some have already started looking for a new place to live." "That's great," I said. "Now I'd like to meet with the tenants of apartment number 8. Mr. Caulfield looked concerned. "Mrs. Harper, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Mr. Baxter was very aggressive yesterday. Maybe we should wait until they calm down." "No," I said firmly. "I want to meet with them now." "I'll be there for you," Oliver said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Mr. Caulfield." The manager sighed. "Good. They should be home." Mr. Baxter called this morning and said he wasn't going to work because he had a housing crisis to deal with. "Call them," I asked. "Tell them the new owner of the building wants to meet with them." Mr. Caulfield nodded and picked up the phone. A short conversation and he hung up. "They'll be expecting us in 15 minutes at their apartment." "No," I shook my head. "I prefer to meet on neutral ground. Here, in your office." Mr. Caulfield picked up the phone again, informed me of the change of venue, and got the okay. "They'll be here in 15 minutes, he said as he hung up. We waited in tense silence. Mr. Caulfield was visibly nervous. Oliver was pensive. I was strangely calm. All decisions had been made. All avenues of escape cut off. All that remained was to play out the last act of the drama. Exactly 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Caulfield opened it, and Sylvia and Nate entered the room. They looked terrible. They were both pale, with dark circles under their eyes. They had obviously been up all night. Sylvia was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, no makeup, her hair in a sloppy ponytail, not at all like the elegant woman I'd seen at the fundraiser on TV. Nate was wearing a shirt but no tie, his usually neatly coiffed hair a mess. When they saw me, their faces changed. First bewilderment, then shock, then understanding. Sylvia turned even paler, if that was possible. Nate froze with his mouth open. "Mom?" Sylvia whispered. "Hello, Sylvia," I said calmly. Dash Nate. "What are you—" Nate started but hesitated, suddenly realizing. "Oh my God, it's you. You're the new owner." "Yes," I said simply. "I bought this building." Sylvia sank into the nearest chair as if her legs refused to hold her up. "But how, when—" 10 days ago, I contacted an old friend of mine, a realtor, I said, nodding toward Oliver. 4 days ago, I became the owner of this building. "But why?" Nate asked, though I could tell by the look in his eyes that he already knew the answer. "What do you think, Nate?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "Why would I buy the building you live in right after you kicked me out of your house?" Nate averted his gaze first. Sylvia sat with her head down, her shoulders shaking. "This is revenge," Nate said quietly. "No," I shook my head. "It's a lesson in what it means to be without a home, without support, without the certainty of tomorrow. A lesson in what it means to be an extra mouth." Sylvia lifted her head. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Mom, please. We were wrong. I was wrong. I should have stood up for you." Yes, you should have, I agreed. But you didn't. We can fix this, Sylvia continued with desperation in her voice. You can come back to us. We'll find a way to make everyone comfortable. I smiled without warmth. It's too late, Sylvia. It's too late for that kind of suggestion. What do you want? Nate asked, and there was no aggression in his voice now, just weariness and defeat. I want you to vacate the apartment within 30 days, as stated in the notice, I said. No compensation and no extension of time. But where are we going to go? Sylvia asked. The children? Where was I supposed to go when you kicked me out of the house on a rainy night? I interrupted her. Where was an elderly woman barely recovering from a broken hip supposed to go? Sylvia lowered her head even lower. We didn't think. Exactly, I said. You weren't thinking. To you, I was just a problem to get rid of. An extra mouth, as Nate put it. I overreacted, Nate said quietly. I shouldn't have said that. But you did say it, I replied, and Sylvia didn't disagree. She agreed with you. Silently, but she agreed. We sat in heavy silence. Mr. Caulfield shifted his gaze from me to Sylvia and Nate, clearly uncomfortable as a witness to a family quarrel. Oliver kept his expression neutral, but I could see the sympathy in his eyes, not just for me, but for my daughter. What should we do? Sylvia finally asked, and her voice sounded like a little girl scared and lost. For a moment I felt a prick of pity. This was my daughter, my flesh and blood, the girl I had held in my arms when she was a baby, the girl I had taught to read, the girl I had kissed on her broken knees. But then I remembered her face the night Nate yelled at me, remembered her silence, her acceptance, and the pity vanished. Do what I did, I said, rising. Find another place to live. Start a new life. Mom, please, Sylvia reached for me, but I stepped back. The notice stays in effect, I said firmly. 30 days, no more, and no compensation. I turned to Mr. Caulfield. See that everything is done in accordance with the law, and that the apartment is vacated in time. He nodded without looking at Sylvia and Nate. I headed for the door, Oliver following me. At the exit, I stopped and looked at my daughter and her husband. You taught me a lesson about being unwanted, I said. Now I've taught you a lesson about what it means to lose your home. I hope you learn it better than I did. Oliver and I walked out of the office, leaving Sylvia in tears and Nate with his head down. The lobby was quiet. The concierge pretended to be minding his own business, but I noticed him cast a curious glance at us. Are you okay? Oliver asked as we stepped outside. Yeah, I replied, though everything was shaking inside. It's done. So now what? He asked as we got into the cab. Now, I hesitated. Now I'm going to live my life, in my own way. Back at the hotel, I felt a strange emptiness. Revenge had been taken, justice had been served, but there was no satisfaction, only fatigue and a feeling that something important had ended, but nothing new had begun. I spent the day in my hotel room, thinking about what had happened and what to do next. I had a building, 12 apartments, soon to be vacated. What was I going to do with them? In the evening, Oliver called. How are you? He asked. Fine, I replied, thinking about the future. And what have you decided? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm getting an idea. Over the next few days, I had several meetings with architects, lawyers, real estate consultants. A plan was slowly emerging. I was indeed going to remodel the building, but not to rent out apartments again. 2 weeks after my meeting with Sylvia and Nate, Mr. Caulfield informed me that they had found a new apartment smaller and farther from downtown than their current one, but still a place to live. They were to vacate apartment number 8 in 4 days, in full compliance with the notice. I decided not to be present on the day of their eviction. I didn't want to turn it into another scene, didn't want to see Sylvia's tears or Nate's humiliation. The lesson had been taught, and now we all had to move on with our lives. Mr. Caulfield called me that evening to let me know that the Baxters had vacated the apartment. They left everything in perfect condition, he said, and they've handed over the keys as they should. Good, I said. Now we can proceed to the next stage. A month later, all the tenants vacated the building, receiving the promised compensation. I moved from the hotel to a temporary apartment nearby to oversee the renovation that had begun. The plan was ambitious to turn the apartment building into an assisted living center for elderly people living alone. 4 apartments on the first floor would become community spaces, a dining room, library, activity room, and medical office. The other 8 apartments remained residential, but fully adapted for the elderly, with handrails, special showers, and emergency call systems. I named the center New Beginnings, because that was the point. A new beginning for me, a new beginning for those who will live here, a new understanding of what care and respect means. The work progressed quickly. I spared no expense, hired the best professionals, chose the best materials. This was my project, my legacy, my atonement for a revenge that had not brought me the satisfaction I had expected. 3 months after the memorable meeting with Sylvia and Nate, when the remodeling was almost complete, I unexpectedly received a letter. A plain paper letter in an envelope, an anachronism in the age of electronic messaging. It was from Sylvia. I held it in my hands for a long time, hesitating to open it. Finally, gathering my courage, I tore open the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Dear Mother, Sylvia wrote, I don't know whether you will read this letter or throw it away at once, but I must try. These months have been the hardest months of my life. Nate and I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The kids changed schools. Nate has to commute an hour and a half to work. I lost my position at the publishing house. I missed too much time dealing with our problems. But you know what? It was a lesson we deserved. You were right. We were terrible to you. We didn't appreciate you. We didn't respect you. We didn't care. We only thought about our own comfort, our own problems. We forgot that you were my mother, the person who gave me life, who was always there for me when I needed it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I understand. I understand how hurt you were, how you felt unwanted, superfluous. Now I know what that feels like. I heard from mutual friends that you're opening a senior center. That's wonderful. You've always been strong, always known how to turn pain into something useful, constructive. I don't expect an answer. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you won. Not by evicting us, but by making me understand. You made me become a better person. Love, Sylvia. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. There were no tears, no anger, not even satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the circle had closed. A lesson had been taught and perhaps learned. I didn't answer Sylvia's letter. I wasn't ready for it, didn't know what to say. Perhaps someday, but not now. Instead, I immersed myself completely in working on the center, hiring staff, developing programs, preparing for the opening. And the day New Beginnings finally opened its doors to its first resident 6 seniors who had no family or whose family couldn't care for them, I felt something that revenge hadn't given me, real satisfaction. Not that I had gotten revenge on someone, but that I had created something of value, something that would help others avoid the pain I had gone through. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, spacious, bright, on the top floor of the center, and looked out at the city spread out below. Somewhere out there lived Sylvia and Nate, trying to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Somewhere there was my blood family, with whom I now shared only a common past, but not a common future. But here, in this building, a new family was being born, not by blood, but by choice. People who needed each other, who were learning to care for each other, to respect each other. I remembered the words Richard had often said: family is not always those to whom we are related by blood. Sometimes it's those who take your hand when you need it. When I was young, I didn't realize the depth of those words. Now, at 72, after all that has happened, I finally understand. Family is not just blood ties. It is caring, respect, understanding. It's a willingness to support when it's hard, to listen when it hurts, to help when you need it. My daughter and her husband did not understand this. They saw me only as a burden, only as a problem, only as an extra mouth. But now I had the opportunity to create something different, a place where no one would be superfluous, where everyone would be important, needed, valued. New Beginnings was not just the name of the center. It was my promise to myself and to all who will live here, to start anew, to create what we lacked, to build the family we never had. And maybe someday, when the wounds have healed, when the anger has subsided, I will find the strength to reach out to Sylvia, not to forget, but to forgive, not to return to the past, but to create a new future. In the meantime, I did what I always did best. I went forward, overcoming difficulties, turning pain into strength, defeats into victories. After all, isn't that what true justice is all about? Not revenge, not punishment, but creating something better from the ruins of what was destroyed. Not an eye for an eye, but light where there was darkness. I smiled at my reflection in the window. 72 years is not the end of the road. It's just a new beginning. And who knows what lies ahead?